Hello and welcome to Wyland Webinars, the state of marketing data enhancement and analytics, how brands and agencies are using data to improve marketing outcomes. Thank you all for being here today as we discuss the findings of Wyland-sponsored research with Digiday and how your data teams and marketers can use those results in planning for the future. I'd like to introduce the data experts who will be participating today. Drew May is Wyland's Chief Client Officer. Michelle Harness is Division Vice President at Wyland. Lewis Raleigh is Senior Vice President of Product Management. And we're particularly excited to have a representative from our research partner, Digiday, James O'Brien, who is President of Digiday's Custom Division. I'm Dennis Smith, Wyland's Vice President of Data Success, and I'll be your host today. But before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to cover. You should know that the webinar is being recorded, and you should all receive a link to that recording shortly after we wrap up today. The other thing is our chat today is private, so I'll be moderating your comments and passing your questions to the panel. If we aren't able to answer your question in today's session, someone will reach out to you personally to ensure you get the information you need. If you have problems seeing or hearing any of the presenters, we suggest refreshing your browser. That it might kick you out of the session, but you should be able to rejoin immediately. So with that, I'd like to get started with our first question. And so James, be helpful, I think, in framing today's discussion, if you could just take a few moments to give an overview of the research.
Absolutely, Dennis. I'm very happy to, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you. Thank you for inviting me to join. It's always a pleasure to work with Wyland. And what is this that we've done this time around? It's a state of the industry report, and the idea of a state of the industry report in our wheelhouse. And to be clear, I'm the president of an in-house content marketing agency. So Custom is the agency within Digiday Media, which is Digiday, Glossy, Modern Retail, and WorkLife. And we work with our sponsors on any number of projects, types, categories, media, and formats. This one is our flagship long-form research report. And the idea is that it's a vehicle. It's a vehicle for bringing something valuable to our audience in the form of new data. And we're looking for trends. We're looking collectively at what we can suggest the audience that we're polling is doing in their given industry. And that's a sponsored report, yes, but it's also a legitimate snapshot of a place and a time in our respondents' day-to-day work. In this case, our goal was to unpack the evolving role of marketing data and analytics and the enhancement of that data for better outcomes for publishers and brands and agencies. We surveyed 193 of them, brands and agencies and publishers together. And we asked them what kind of data they collected and how they use it to run their advertising and marketing campaigns. And they also told us quite a bit about data enhancement and the relationships they have with their clients and their internal and external teams, and what sorts of resources that they are turning to complete those projects that allow them to make the next campaign better than the last one. We developed on a tactical level a 15 to 20 question survey with our partners. However, in this case, it was somewhat more elaborate than we usually do, because we wanted to create tracks for brands and agencies and publishers that were distinct. So while the total number of questions that any taker took was within our parameters, we definitely developed about triple the size of a survey. And it's very important to work with a sponsor that knows its way around these things if you're trying to answer that particular request and satisfy that, because it gets complicated very quickly, being able to see how these questions interact and what the logic is within a survey instrument to move a taker from one track to the next and make all that happen the right way. Once that's built, we shake hands, wish each other luck, and we flight that survey. And we get it to our audience through newsletter placements, emails to our subscribers, social media placements. Surveys can take anything from 15 to 45 or 60 days. It depends on the topic. I always remind our partners, and we're very lucky that the Wyland team sees the world the way we do. I always remind our partners in general that you can get as specific and narrow on a topic as you like. You just have to understand that what fills as you dilate that circle down to a narrower topic. What's filling the space around it is the time needed to complete So that's what we did. We spent a lot of time and a lot of marketing inventory making sure that we got a good, healthy sample set out of this, and we were very pleased that we did. Once we had that in hand, we took that survey and we fueled an outline with it, and we talked with the Wyland team at length about nuances and complexities within that outline, and then we wrote. As we wrote, we interviewed subject matter experts in the Wyland shop. We talked to people outside of it, and brought them the material that we're now here to talk about today. So when we say what did we do, that's what we did, and that's the context for this conversation.
Thank you for that, James. We certainly found it valuable at Wyland, and that's where I'd like to start the conversation today. I'd like to start it with some of the most interesting things that we saw as an outcome or as the information in the study. And so, Drew, I'd like to start with you. If you could share a little bit about what struck you most from the research report that was put together.
Yeah, absolutely, Dennis, and happy to be here. And thanks, James, for your partnership and getting this research produced. I think it provided some very interesting insights and information. So, yeah, the most interesting thing to me that really jumped out here in this first area of the survey was some of the brands who talked about that it was very challenging for them to understand where high quality data sources existed. I've been in the industry for a long time, and typically that hasn't been a big problem. There's always been an overabundance of data sources. Maybe the focus was on high quality, and that was the challenge. But I thought that was really interesting that both, I think it was the publishers and the brands called out that they had challenges finding high quality data sources. I think it's interesting because, I think most brands and publishers and agencies are overrun with data. I think the secondary aspect of this that was also very intriguing was identifying the data types that were most useful for them. I mean, obviously, you have to have a very solid understanding of what your marketing strategy is, how you want to engage and interact with your customers. And then from there, that kind of drives what data you need to help support and fuel that strategy. So I completely agree with that. I think there are a ton of data partners out there. Our experience with folks at Epsilon, Axiom, Experian, Data Axle, even Wyland with our own data product now. I think there are a lot of folks who can help both brands, agencies, and publishers navigate the data landscape. And I think it's becoming even more interesting with what's going on in the digital world, some of the exhaust that gets created through intent, through people who are in market for particular products, services, things like that. And so to me, Dennis, that was really the most interesting thing that jumped out. And I would encourage anybody that feels like they're having a challenge navigating the vast array of data and the data that exists out there, really work with a partner to help you figure out what's most important for you and that supports your strategy. And I guarantee you they can help you find data sources that'll fill in gaps you have and also help fuel what you're trying to do from a customer engagement standpoint.
Right. I think that's a really nice way of putting it. And I just have a couple follow-ons on that too. And I think that you hit the nail on the head when you talk about there's two dimensions to this, right? There's the data quality dimension, which speaks to how accurate is the data, what kind of coverages can I get, how easily accessible it is, and how can I actually get it into my organization to make sense and heads or tails of it. So there are challenges around high quality, that aspect of it. And then there's also this, I mean, if you look at the LumaScape, for instance, for data providers, all of the logos on there are very, very small. There's a million different providers that are all talking about what they can do. And so from my perspective, and when I'm speaking with clients, most of them really appreciate sort of that partnership as a trusted advisor between a company like us or like the other quality providers. So they place a lot of value on the team and on our experience and to sort of guide them into making high quality decisions. So I think that's the other dimension to this that really makes sense. Michelle, what was the most interesting thing that struck you?
Well, I think what I found interesting was one thing was the number of sources that they had, and the correlation between the brands, agencies, and publishers, if you look at this question and the responses, 4 to 6 was the prime, and they're all very even in that. It'll be interesting to see, does that number change as we see more of these companies utilizing clean rooms or data share platforms like a Snowflake or LiveRamp's platforms, to see how does that, what does that look like? And it's also interesting to me that some of them are using 7 to 10. And how does that correlation go into getting those high quality data partners that you and Drew just spoke about? Is it that they're trying to get as many as they can and just picking? And again, they should be trying to find the best of those. And then the one more thing, if you could go to the next slide, just to talk about this. It was interesting, the correlation between the number of third-party data sources, and then in the previous slide, that 4 to 6 that you saw, it is literally the 46%, 45, 44%. It's almost right in tune. So it sounds like maybe many of the partners that Drew mentioned earlier, maybe everyone's using some of those same third-party providers. And I think that things are going to expand to maybe some of the second party and the data exchanges in the next couple of years, as it's easier to transfer data back and forth between all of the different providers and pick and choose what is really working for those brands and agencies.
Yeah, and Michelle, too, the other thing I think is the emergence of the agencies over the last few years who have helped become curators of data as well on behalf of their brand clients, which has fueled a lot of what they're doing on the media side, but also gone back into helping them on their customer strategies as well. I think they've been doing a lot of aggregation of data as well to kind of create a repository or create access to all that information as well on behalf of their brand. So I think that's been something that's evolved a little bit from where it used to just be the data providers, and as a brand you had to go figure out who you were going to work with, but now the agencies have stepped in to help fill some of that void at making recommendations and also helping brands navigate what's the best data that helps them support their marketing strategy too.
Yeah, Drew, like that. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying I agree with him. If you were to look at the landscape 10 years ago, the number of agencies that would have a strategy or analytic team would have been much less, where now it's very common.
That's the point I was gonna illustrate. Is it really struck me looking at the agency results, and as I thought about it, I realized that was representing that trend. The level of analysis taking place at agencies now is impressive, and the sophistication of the analytics they're employing has really become a major point in the industry, and I think it's driving a lot of the thirst for data as well.
I also think you mentioned platforms like Snowflake and things like that. I think there's also a dynamic in the industry when I'm talking to clients and on the brand side and other sides, where organizations are, because of privacy concerns, because of all the other things that are going on in the marketplace, they're increasingly more hesitant to send their own first-party data out to a bunch of other places to get more information on. And so I actually expect the number of data partners that people or brands are going with and acquiring to shrink over time. And again, that's another reason why it's important for brands, agencies, publishers to understand, what data is very, very valuable to them and things like that. So I don't know if you all have a perspective on that, but I hear that every day from real world.
No, I think in some industries more than others, right, Dennis, where you've got regulated industries who really are getting forced to be incredibly careful with the kind of the management of the information that they have specifically on consumers. I think those industries are becoming much more hesitant about sending their data to a lot of different providers, for whether it's for analysis or enhancement or whatever the use case may be. But I completely agree with you. I think we've seen a lot more of that in the last probably 3 to 5 years than we have previously. And that's likely a trend, exactly as you called out, that will continue as well. I think we'll see more of it, and specifically as the states enact more privacy legislation where it makes it very restrictive for the management of that data, and you want to keep more of that close to where it's originated, where the source, all those things. And I think we'll see more of that here in the upcoming years as well.
Yeah. And so for our listeners on the participants in the webinar, what that means for you probably is understanding how to build a better business case with your acquisition of data while reducing that risk. So, Louis, what about you? What did you find most interesting in the report?
Sure. Well, I think Drew and Michelle brought out some really good points. The amount of the search that's going on using multiple sources and looking for high quality data, and along those lines, what struck out to me was also the types of data that they're interested in. Not really filling in PII, because most of our clients and most of the brands and agencies in the industry have good feeds for the PII. There is some PII enrichment that they're interested in. 1 out of 4 companies reflected that, but it's more demographics and spending behaviors, lifestyles, and life stages, the types of things that help you round out your personas, that add layers of complexity to your understanding of the customers, and help you both segment and also drive predictive analytics in terms of personalizing campaigns or personalizing touch points, or determining the best next product or best next offer. All of those decisions are driven by a breadth of data. And of course, coverage and depth is very important as well when we're talking about employing it, which speaks back to the number of sources or number of partners that typically companies are working with, which, as Michelle pointed out, is typically more than one, and often as many as 4, 5, or 6. So it was the types of data, and demographics have been around for a long time, as I have been. But the fact is, they're very important characteristics in the model. They're very important characteristics in segmentation in a company's persona, so they remain valuable. But also things that are valuable now are applying analytics to that base data and having predictive behaviors and signals that reflect those behaviors. And that's where I think the spending behaviors and propensities was so widely sought after. So that was to me, it was illustrating what I mentioned earlier, is the thirst for data. I think that analytics are increasing in their application. The sophistication of those analytics has increased and improved, and that in turn needs data and the right kinds of data to be effective.
Louis, what do you make of sort of the use of AI and machine learning, and then creating these unique and different types of elements? Can you talk a little bit about that? I know we'd had a discussion about that I think might be useful for the participants in the webinar.
Sure, and we talk about it a little bit in the study as well, because it's a kind of a current throughout when you're talking about data is where are we with the application of AI in this industry. And I think there was a McKinsey study that said that they believe that the potential value of analytics into marketing and sales is somewhere around the order of $2.5 trillion. And that value comes in the ability to improve the analytics that we're using. And years ago, we had expert systems that were basically rules-based. And from that gave way to predictive analytics. And those predictive analytics were fairly static and a lot of human involvement. And those have given way or started to give way to machine learning, as you mentioned, like elastic net, neural nets, and, those types of techniques. And the industry is embracing those. Now, if you look at the industry and read our marketing materials, you'll think that AI is everywhere, but the reality is we've just begun to touch the value there. So although I see a lot of improvements in the ability to predict and also the speed with which you can create models, shortening the time to event of creating a model, the fact is that things like the use of natural language processing to uncover things within weblogs or free-form text that tell us about sentiment or tell us about intent is just in its infancy. And we really will see a lot of development in that area, as well as continued development in the machine learning, predictive analytics techniques that are employed in our analytic teams and in the development of the data as well. And I haven't mentioned identity resolution, but when we talk about accuracy and quality data, we have to know that the data is not only accurate in its inception, but also that it's linked to the correct individuals or the correct households. And I think that's a key component of quality that we're starting to see artificial intelligence make some inroads on in the use of identity graphs and their application on understanding the resolution of consumers into the correct information available for them.
I think the other dynamic, Lewis, and you mentioned that the industry is really embracing AI and machine learning, and I think some of the conversations I've had with clients in the last couple months, there's also this focus on different state governments and other entities also shining a light on AI, and so there's a lot to be sort of figured out when we talk about AI and machine learning and how we apply it in our industry. And I know that we and other corporations are working very, very closely with government entities to make sure that it's laws that are crafted that are good for everybody. So I think that's the other consideration.
I believe it's very important, as you bring it out, that for the participants and companies that we all work for to be aware of artificial intelligence, its applications, and its evolution, as you're talking about, whether it's the application in the particular business problems or the regulation that's being discussed and maybe on the horizon for different aspects of it.
Really good discussion. Hey, James, what was the most interesting finding from your point of view?
Oh, a couple of good points made already, and I'll bring them up in a moment or two if we get to it. But from my point of view, and this speaks to not only a suspicion I have, but something that I see as I look at reports of these kinds over time, over the past 3 or 4 years, is that all of these steps we're talking about, enriching and enhancing with different kinds of technologies and different kinds of resources, it's still largely an externally driven scenario. We had 57% of the brands said so, 76% of the agencies said so. They're going outside their immediate team structure to get these steps into play. And that suggests that, to me, the team structures inside brands and agencies are a lot like they always have been, and that investment in data and what we might think of as best practices or better practices or more intense and dynamic practices are important tasks that are still being assigned to partners for at least the near future. And I think that speaks to a larger observation that I have, that data is, there are other surveys we've run recently, and I can't say who they're by yet because they're not published, but they've been telling us a little bit about 2024 and some feelings that people have about data and the brand and agency side and the publisher side. Still going to be a third-party world right up until the end of 2024 for most of these people. Just what they've been doing. It's going to be a real nail biter for many of these firms when they get to that place of having to flip a switch and do something different. And they tell us that it's going to be the primary mover of their marketing work in the first part of the year to come. So I'm not surprised to see this. Sort of. I don't want to say this isn't derogatory to the firms that are doing the work, but there's an arm's length relationship still between the brands and the agencies in this report and the hands-on keys part of doing this. They're getting reports and ticking boxes, and I don't know if that's a bad thing, but I think that it's definitely a way that you shape your awareness of the applications of AI, for instance, because you're even as it was in 2017 when I was inside ad tech, somebody assumes you've got it handled. And that goes to maybe what Michelle was saying, like, is this the highest quality choice you could be making?
Right.
Well, some of the most useful information in the study from my perspective revolved around the types of things that agencies, brands, and publishers are actually using data for. So the use cases, and I'd like to discuss, Michelle, your perspective on maybe some agency use cases that you found informative in the study, and then we'll speak with the other panelists around the specific use cases that they're seeing. But I'd like to go there if you wouldn't mind, Michelle.
Sure. And, and I'm going to start from more of a generic standpoint from the use cases of using the data to what Lewis spoke about. And this is when you saw how many were using or looking for demographics as a primary, and then going down to lifestyle and intent. I see that from an agency perspective when they are looking for those high quality data elements or those type of segmenting data elements, they will be looking at it from a creative standpoint. So you can't just think from segmentation. This could be a creative agency or a full service agency trying to gather that information to help within a creative process, creating where the ad should be placed, what it should look like, so they can learn more about that consumer or the brand that they're helping to work with. So, it is broader than just saying, yes, I'm using it for segmenting. It is a creative aspect, in some cases, even from a geographical aspect, something might only be limited to one part of the country versus another, and they're looking at all of that.
Drew, what kind of brand use cases are you focused on?
I think a lot of it, Dennis, is really around the core things, even what Michelle described, where I think customer segmentation still a very prominent use case for a lot of the brands, trying to get a better understanding of what their customer segments look like. I think from there, then they go develop personas of the characteristics of what those groups look like, and then how do I want to engage with them effectively. So I think that's still a core use case. I think the other thing too is one that's been around for a while, which is enhancing your best customers to get a sense of, I create a common denominator through lifestyle, demographics, other data sources to then go say, my best customers look like this demographically. I know what they look like transactionally. Now I have a view of them into the acquisition world to say, I need to go create audiences that have these characteristics that likely will produce the best results for me from an acquiring new customer standpoint. So I think that's another use case. And then the one I'm going to promote that I think is one that I don't hear a ton about, but I think really is something that could be used a lot more. And that's the personalization piece, where the ability to drive, Michelle mentioned this, to drive creative through data where you alter what the imagery is that you use in a creative piece, what the words that are used, the offer you may make, things like that, to really be much more dynamic in leveraging data in a dynamic way that fuels and drives the creative that an individual person or household may get. I think there needs to be more of that so that the particular offer that a brand's making will actually speak to the recipient on the other end. And I think there's a lot of great ways for them to do that. I don't see data being leveraged that way in a lot of cases, maybe a few, but I think there's an opportunity to do much more of that.
That's a great point, Drew. And I've had conversations with clients and brands who were trying to do that and wanted to do that, but didn't quite have either the mechanisms in place or the policies or processes in place to do it. And so they were limited in what they do. But I think we all as consumers know that it's much more effective and interesting and useful to receive a personalized message that really speaks to something you're interested in at the time you're interested in it, than it is to just receive something for weeks because you searched for it on a search engine. And so I think you hit a characteristic that really speaks to the acceptance, with consumers and a time of consumers' privacy. It's very important that we respect privacy, but at the same time, all of us as consumers want to have our lives be a little bit easier. And that personalization is a way of helping people through their day to have be a little bit nicer in how the messages are presented and a little bit more in tune.
Yep. I totally agree with that. And I mean, Michelle, Lewis, Drew, James, we've all been in this industry for a long, long time, and we've talked about using data to do personalization for, gosh, I started in '95 and I was working with Dell Computer. They did a great job of it even at the time, but it's never been easier to do it than it is now. And there are less and less brands and in companies that are taking advantage of it. So I think that's a very valuable use case. That's not, I mean, it's ubiquitous, but it's not being optimized, I guess. James,
Right.
what kind of use cases were you interested in the report?
I think maybe I'd move it forward a notch and offer some things that I've been seeing in terms of use cases that are not as thoroughly highlighted in this particular iteration of our work together. It's on the publisher side. I've been doing some work with the team over the past couple of weeks on some data forward research around publishers, data and analytics. And I think it echoes what has broadly been spoken to by my co-panelists today, and that's audience segmentation and analytics that allow publishers to not only make more hay out of their endemic audiences, but also model and identify non-endemic audiences and unlock new territory for them to bring in advertisers that might not have considered them before. We've seen Health magazine do that in particular recently under the Dotdash-Meredith umbrella. Other things that the kinds of enhancements and enrichments we're talking about generate that publishers are talking about a lot right now is CPM lift. You know, being able to show that audience-based campaigns work better allows them to push those CPMs north, and when they do that, it strengthens the case for advertising as a major revenue stream, even as they grapple with the constant backbeat. You must diversify. You must diversify. These are things that are extremely important, and they go to that central question I think that we've been exploring in this conversation: the quality of the data, maybe the proximity of your analytics to your activators. I think that we could certainly have a side conversation about sort of active versus passive relationships on the publisher side with data. And in some reports that we've done in the recent past, we've noticed that analytics teams are smaller than we expected them to be in the publisher wheelhouse. And most of it's on the sales and revenue side in terms of resources being allocated. So those things are, I think, I just fill in the if there are any, fill in some of the blanks around what our publishers up to and all of this. Those are some things I would point to.
James, you make great points, and that's exactly what we're seeing in our publishing in our publishing business. A number of our publishers are doing just that. They're using data. They're using what they know about their subscribers, what they know about their audiences, and what we know about their audiences, or what other providers know about their audiences, and they're investing heavily in figuring that out to create better audiences that work for their advertisers, that allow them to optimize their relationships with their advertisers. So that's a very insightful thing that you've mentioned here. Lewis, how about you? The use cases that you're seeing mostly?
Yeah, I think we've talked about most of them already. I think the ability to identify segments and micro segments, and both not only use that for acquisition, but cross-selling and that type of campaign. I see that a lot, and also the understanding of the messaging. So that speaks a little bit to the personalization, but segmenting and micro segmenting to understand the right messaging, and typically that encompasses some form of personas within, buyer personas within the entire database, or segments of the database themselves, to drive that. And that's also an area of focus and an area for improvement, as we've spoken to. But that's what I see a lot is really the application of analytics. When we're looking at the data, talking about data with people, they're interested in not only the accuracy and quality of the data and the breadth and the depth, but also what will pop in models and what will help them to be effective in making those segments and micro segments.
I think those are great points, Lewis. And just to follow on to you'd mentioned persona, sort of the idea of data-driven persona development. And I'm seeing that every week in conversations with clients, more than I ever have before, where they're trying to find unique and different data sources that describe their customers in order to to create these data-driven personas that they then can use to scale in different applications. So, and it's never been easier in terms of finding that data and sourcing that data. The trick and the hard part is using it in your organization, right? And so many of our clients are forming strategic sort of task force around this. They're sponsoring it at a high level of the company, and they're tackling it head on. So I think that would be the addition that I would have to what your comments were.
And it may have something to do with the increasing level of analytics we're seeing within agencies, in that companies, as James pointed out, often have a large number of their analytics turned to the business side rather than the marketing side. So they're looking at analytics of the numbers rather than analytics of the customers, and they need help. And sometimes it's very difficult to get that help. And agencies have recognized that need, I think, and are doing a good job of stepping into that void where it exists.
Absolutely. Right. Well, we've had a good discussion around a variety of topics so far, and we want to make sure that we can get to all the questions that are coming in. We also want to leave you with some really concrete ideas and things that you can use in your business. And so, with that in mind, I'd like to go around the horn and maybe ask our panelists. So the one thing that you would take away from our discussion that you'd want to leave our audience with. So Drew, what would be that for you?
Probably for me, Dennis, and this was highlighted in the study a little bit, and it really referred to a lot of brands and a lot of companies maybe not evaluating data in an ongoing manner. And I would encourage everybody to always do that. You should always be evaluating data sources, looking at things that could help drive improve business performance, maybe help describe who your customer set is a little bit better, like Lewis mentioned, or help fuel a persona. So just ensure you have a process to evaluate data. And I don't think anyone should ever say, yep, we're good, we're done, we don't need any more information to use within our enterprise. I think you should always be evaluating data and figuring out if there's something else that maybe you didn't realize really could have a profound impact on your marketing efforts. So that's probably the one thing I would leave everybody with.
How about you, Michelle?
I think mine is around the quality of partnerships. We talk about in the survey finding the right number. It's also finding that right quality one as well. And I think that partnership spans across not just only the data partnership, but making sure you have the right partnership between whoever's providing you the data, the brand you're working with, and the publishers. How does that partnership all work together? That's a little bit of an underlying tone of what I read between the lines of the surveys, that you've got to find the right quality for that entire relationship.
It's interesting is because sometimes we're put in a position to sort of connect the dots between all the different players because we're sort of the glue that pieces things together. And so I think that's a valuable piece of information, is that you should also look for partners that can help you do that. So really good stuff. Lewis, how about you?
Yeah, I think what you just said is kind of leads into what I think is a good takeaway: is look for partners that understand your business and understand the data world, but also understand the importance of enough data to fuel all of the efforts we've talked about today. Enough data to give that breadth of knowledge about your customers to really have solid analytics that can drive your database marketing. And I think that some partners get that, some partners don't so much. So it's really finding the partners that can work with you and help you apply your analytics. It's the data that will drive the analytics and make it effective, and also help drive those analytics to success.
How about you, James?
I take a slightly different tack because I've been thinking about this conversation while it's been happening, and also about this project now that I've had a chance to reflect on it in preparation for today. And I'd say to our audience, when you're thinking about telling stories about your own business, let's say it's Weiland in this case, think about this conversation and this report and what it does regarding this topic of data enhancement, data enrichment. This whole conversation and this report has been doing something that I always highly recommend: focus on outcomes and not features. And by that, I mean, we are often, as marketers, and to some extent, I think everybody involved in this call could have that title attached to them at some point in their day. Under the sway of a belief that it's the features of what we sell that are the thing that people must know about, but it's the outcomes that we create that are actually the real story. And by talking about these outcomes the way we have today, when I say outcomes, I mean, is the data, we were thinking about how high of a quality is the data that you're using? How much allocation to sales and revenue versus marketing analytics are you creating? These are all things that recommendations and observations about success can emerge from. And that's real hardcore value in the world of content marketing. Stick with the outcomes. Someone else can talk about your features once you've made a case that you are sincerely concerned and you have something to say that is rich in quantitative and also qualitative information. So a short side journey to content marketing and content marketing approaches. This is a shining example of how to do it, team, and a pleasure to be with you while you do it.
Thank you so much, Dave. That's really good stuff, and it is a good reminder that it's never the data. It's always what the data can do and the value that it can drive. It's never what the solution is, but it's always what business value you can bring to enhance your brand's relationships with their customers, your agency's effectiveness in reaching them and things like that. So that's a really good reminder. All right, well, been a great discussion so far. I appreciate the panelists' thoughts very, very much. And we've reached the time where we're going to start in the Q of A. But before we dig into our Q of A, you can download a copy of today's presentation by clicking the link in the comments section. So Craig just posted that there. And now we're gonna take a few minutes on some questions for the audience. And so one of the and there are many questions here. So again, we'll reiterate: if we don't get to your question and we don't answer your question, we will follow up with an answer in short order for you specifically. But there's an easy one that I can answer. So we'll leave the easy ones for me. But we had a question about what are firmographics, and so just wanted to level set that. That's primarily business to business data. So it's information about business to business customers. So think employee size, sales turnover, SIC codes, and other information related to businesses and contacts at businesses. So hope that clarifies that. One of the most interesting questions I think that has come across in the discussion is that we mentioned that there's less of a focus on PII enrichment and enhancement and things like that, and more customer lifestyle related data. And the questioner points out that, hey, this has been available for many years for many reputable companies. So they're asking if this issue has been like the clarity of source. Has this changed? What's changed in that since it's been available for a long time? Why is it so hard to find? I don't know, Lewis. Maybe we'll start there because I think that came up in your section, and I might answer a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I did. I think it's twofold. One is it's just important data, and so it continues to be an important topic or important search to try to make sure that you have enough of that information to understand how people are living their lives. But there are also new sources for that data. There's social activity. There's other types of online activity that now can be utilized in combination with survey information, which historically had been the source for that. So survey information is very good, but it's much better when other dimensions are added into it. So it's a combination of those, I think.
And Lewis, I would agree on that. I don't know if any other panelists would want to weigh in before I kind of add my 2 cents here too. But from my perspective, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of just that there are many more sources of data for this lifestyle related affinities, if you will. And so you mentioned some of those. I think there are some source questions, meaning how do I want to phrase it? Much of the data that's available to people really is either self-reported or observed behavior on the web, sort of anonymous, pseudonymous, and things like that. And the jury is still out largely on sort of the accuracy of that data too. So I think what we saw in the survey is that maybe some of the participants in the survey have been struggling with the quality of that data from where they're sourcing it. So I think that would be another thing that I would say. I don't know if you all have a perspective on that.
I think I would also just add to this, not so much, I do agree with the quality portion of it, but I think it has changed not only from the additional sources from social, but also if you look at, you can develop from an analytics standpoint what someone's lifestyle and interests are going to be based on transactions they make. Therefore, you know, again, how they're spending money, you can develop this as part of their lifestyle. So there's additional maybe techniques that have been developed. The sources have been there, but we changed how we create segments and data. Lewis, I don't know if you would, I think you would agree.
That's a great point. Great point. Behavior-based lifestyle information is there, as well as flags that say, hey, I'm interested in this, but also, and much more valuable, are behavior-based lifestyle signals, which I think it's a great point.
Great discussion. Next question that I'd like to get to here. We had a question about, are you seeing a resurgence of demand for geography-based modeling and targeting? So and the implication is, have people given up on the one-to-one targeting? And so does anybody have a perspective on that before I weigh in?
I can weigh in initially and say that I have seen not necessarily a resurgence, but I've seen a continuing strength of modeling that's based on geo roll-ups or on geofencing or geo-focused marketing. I haven't seen the people giving up on the one-to-one though, and I think that's an important point. So I've seen it as a continued strength to be able to look at geo and understand what that's telling you. But I think also there's a desire and an intent and effort made to still continue to make that one-to-one connection.
I would agree. I think that they go hand in hand. So take, for instance, a retail application, you would still want a one-to-one marketing if you're pushing something, but you would also want to know a geo level or a tracking if they're going around that store going in. So they still work together. It's situational.
I mentioned just one little thing, the emergence of location data and availability of location data it kind of emphasizes what you just said too, that's being folded into analytics, especially in the retail arena.
Well, the other thing is we have new channels we didn't have. And I'm probably dating myself, but 15 years ago when the smartphone has become prevalent, to where so much in-app advertising that occurs today that didn't even exist, 15 years ago, that it's created opportunities to leverage some of those things that we weren't able to do via the normal channels we all tried to use, whether that was email or direct mail or even telemarketing back in the day. So I think, the emergence of some of the new channels as well as also created the opportunity to try to do more of that.
True.
Completely agree. I think just to highlight a use case that I worked on in a previous life around digital out-of-home advertising, the best practices that we had were companies that did both. Right, when they could identify a person at a place and understand, sort of their affinity for the brand, they would utilize that. And when they couldn't, they would also use a decisioning tree based on data that could allow them to improve results. So I think all of you are exactly hitting the nail on the head when it's not giving up on one-on-one. It's just either changing the mix or using everything at your disposal to improve your business results. All right, we have a few more questions that came through, but I think we're getting close to the wrap up now. I did mention earlier that you can download a link to the SOTI. We put that link in the chat again. So I'd encourage everybody to do that if they don't have it. I would also encourage the team. Well, I guess I'd like to thank everybody for sharing your thoughts. I'd like to thank Michelle and James and Lewis and Drew. I hope our attendees taken away some good actionable advice on how you can move your business forward using data. As a registered attendee, you'll be notified by email when the webinar is available online so that you can do it again or share it with colleagues that weren't able to attend. And again, reiterating, if you've asked a question in the chat that we weren't able to get to, one of our presenters will respond to you directly via email. Also, if this conversation prompted ideas or questions for that you have, we'd love it if you could visit our website or email us at info@wyland.com. Be happy to provide more resources or answer any questions. And I think with that, I'd like to just say thank you all for being here again today, and we hope this has been a valuable use of your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Dennis.
Appreciate you.